Faye Nolan hadn't even been on the ranch for 10 minutes before she stepped in horse manure and got mud splattered across her jeans, her only decent pair.
Great.
Just great, she muttered, trying in vain to wipe her boot on a patch of dry grass. You're not from around here, are you? The voice came from behind her, deep, amused, and so confident it made her pulse jump. She spun around. The man standing there was tall, broad-shouldered, and sun-kissed in a way that only came from working outside, not from a tanning bed. He had a Stetson tilted back on his head, a button-down navy shirt rolled to his elbows, and jeans that looked like they belonged on a billboard. His eyes were the color of dark whiskey, sharp and unreadable. "No," Faye said, brushing mud off her pants. "But I'm here to work. Faye Nolan. I'm the new ranch hand." He didn't offer a handshake, just raised an eyebrow. "You applied for a livestock job with no experience?" "Technically, I applied for a ranch assistant position," she corrected, chin lifting. "And I learn fast." He stared at her for a long second, then gave a short nod. "Name's Nolan Maddox. Owner." Of course he was. The name clicked immediately. She'd seen it on the paperwork. Maddox Ranch, one of the largest in the state. She had no idea the man behind it looked like he belonged in a cowboy calendar. Faye had taken the job out of desperation. After her mom's medical bills wiped out her savings, she left her tiny apartment and barely their life in the city to take whatever paid. She hadn't expected a sprawling ranch with a private lake, miles of rolling hills, and a main house that looked like it belonged in a luxury magazine. Nolan didn't say another word. He just turned and walked toward the barn. "Guess I'll follow you then," she said under her breath, grabbing her duffel. The first few days were rough. Faye was up at dawn every morning, hauling feed, shoveling stalls, and trying to figure out how not to get trampled by cattle. Nolan didn't talk much, just gave her tasks and corrected her when she messed up, which was often. But he wasn't cruel. He noticed when she skipped lunch to finish mucking out a stall and left a sandwich on the railing. He taught her how to hold a rope properly, how to approach the horses without spooking them, and how to move around the ranch dogs without getting barked at. It wasn't much, but it was something. One evening, as the sky turned orange and gold, a thunderstorm rolled in fast. Faye was at the far end of the property, checking fence posts like Nolan had asked, when the wind picked up and lightning struck a tree not far from her. Her heart slammed into her chest. She turned to run and nearly ran into Nolan on horseback. "Get on," he said, reaching down. Faye didn't argue. She grabbed his hand and swung up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist as the horse took off through the rain. By the time they reached the barn, both of them were soaked. He jumped down first, then helped her off. "You okay?" he asked, pushing wet hair out of her face. His hand lingered a second too long. "Yeah," she said, breathless. "That storm came out of nowhere." "Welcome to Texas," he said. They stood there for a second, the storm still raging outside, thunder rumbling close. Faye's heart hadn't settled. Maybe it was the adrenaline. Or maybe it was the way Nolan was looking at her, like he was seeing her differently now. A horse kicked the stall behind them, breaking the moment. "I'll get you a towel," he said, stepping back. The rest of the week passed in a blur. Faye found herself noticing things she hadn't before: the way Nolan's jaw tightened when he was focused, how he always checked the fences himself after a storm, how the ranch hands respected him without question. One night, he asked her to help him move hay bales from the storage barn. It was late, and the moon was high, casting silver light over the fields. "You're tougher than you look," Nolan said as she wiped sweat from her brow. Was that a compliment? "A fact," he said, handing her a bottle of water. "Most people last 2 days out here. You've made it 2 weeks." "Guess I'm stubborn," she said. He looked at her for a long second again.
"Yeah,
you are." There was something in his voice she couldn't read and didn't want to look away from. The next morning, a delivery truck pulled up to the ranch. "Who's that for?" Faye asked. Nolan handed her a small box. Inside was a brand new pair of boots. Real leather. Not cheap. "They're yours," he said simply. "Those old ones you wear are falling apart." "I can't accept these," she protested. "You already did," he said, walking away. Faye stared after him, stunned. No one had ever done something like that for her before. Later that day, one of the ranch hands, Colton, leaned against the fence next to her. "You know the boss is a millionaire, right?" he said casually. "Bought this land cash when he was 25. People tried to buy him out for years. He never sold." Faye blinked. "Seriously?" "Yep. Doesn't flaunt it. But trust me, he could have bought 10 ranches with what he's got." She didn't know what to say to that. That night, she sat alone on the back porch of the bunkhouse, watching the stars. Nolan walked up behind her, quiet as always. "You settling in okay?" he asked. "Yeah," she said. "It's different out here, but I like it." He nodded, then looked at her. "You've got grit, Faye. That's rare." She met his eyes, heart thudding. "You're not what I expected either," she said softly. Something shifted between them, unspoken, but undeniable. He held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded once and walked away. As she watched him disappear into the night, Faye realized something dangerous. She was starting to fall for the man who owned this ranch, and she had no idea what to do about it. The creek had risen overnight. Faye stared at the rushing brown water tearing through the low fields, the wooden bridge that had connected the north pasture now completely submerged. Debris twisted in the current branches, fence pieces, a metal bucket, and she winced at the sound of something heavy slamming into one of the bridge posts. Nolan stood beside her, arms crossed over his chest, his jaw set. "That bridge is gone," he said. "We'll need to rebuild." Faye glanced sideways at him. "Is that the only way to get to the cattle on the other side?"
"For now," he said.
"There's a longer trail through the canyon, but it's steep. Takes half a day." "I'll go with you," she offered. He didn't argue. By mid-morning, they'd saddled up and were making their way through the narrow trail that wound between red rock cliffs and scrub brush. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and wild sage, and the horses picked their way slowly through the uneven terrain. Faye adjusted her grip on the reins. "You ever think about leaving all this? The ranch, I mean." Nolan didn't answer right away. He kept his eyes on the trail ahead, his profile calm but unreadable. "I did once," he said finally, "when I was younger." "What stopped you?" He looked over at her then, his gaze steady. "I realized I didn't want to build someone else's dream." Faye absorbed that in silence. When they reached the ridge, the valley opened up beneath them in a breathtaking sprawl of green and gold, the cattle scattered like dark dots in the distance. Nolan led the way down the switchback trail, and Faye followed, her thighs aching from the steady descent. By the time they reached the lower pasture, the sun had fully broken through the clouds. The cattle seemed unaffected by the storm, grazing calmly between puddles. "You know," Faye said as they checked the fence line, "I always thought being out here would feel lonely. But it doesn't." "It's not lonely if you've got purpose," Nolan said. She glanced at him, surprised by the softness in his voice. They rode back slowly, the horses tired, the trail baking under the sun. As they reached the top of the canyon, Faye's horse stumbled slightly on some loose rock. She gripped the saddle horn, her heart leaping. "You okay?" Nolan asked sharply, already dismounting. "I'm fine," she said, breathless. "Just slipped." He took the reins from her and ran his hand down the horse's leg, checking carefully. "Nothing broken," he said. "But we'll walk them back from here." They led the horses the rest of the way, silence stretching between them. Not tense, just thoughtful. That night, after the horses were stabled and dinner was finished, Faye found herself wandering toward the main house. She wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the quiet. Maybe it was the way Nolan had looked at her on the canyon trail, like he saw something in her that even she didn't fully understand yet. She paused outside the porch, unsure. The screen door creaked open. "You're not lost, are you?" Nolan asked, standing in the doorway. "No," she said, lips twitching. "Just restless." He stepped aside. "Come in." The inside of the house was warm and lived in, with polished wood floors and shelves lined with old books and framed photographs. A stone fireplace crackled in the corner, casting flickering light across the room. Faye's eyes landed on a black and white photo near the mantel. A younger version of Nolan stood beside an older man, same eyes, same height, same stubborn set of the shoulders. "Your dad?" she asked. He nodded, his expression unreadable. "He passed 6 years ago. Heart attack."
"I'm sorry."
"He built this place from nothing," Nolan said quietly. "Every fence post, every barn wall. I used to think I had to earn it all over again just to deserve it." Faye looked at him, really looked. "You already have." He didn't respond, but something shifted in his expression. Later, as she stepped back out into the cool night air, Nolan followed her to the porch. "You're not like most people who show up here," he said. "I'll take that as a compliment." "It is," he said. "Most people want something. You just work." She wrapped her arms around herself, uncertain what to do with the intensity of his gaze. "I didn't come here looking for anything," she said. "But I think maybe I found something anyway." His hand lifted, brushing her hair back from her face. The contact sent a jolt through her, too sudden, too strong. Before she could speak, a loud honk startled them both. From the driveway, a sleek black SUV pulled up, tires crunching over gravel. A man in a press suit stepped out, holding a leather folder. Nolan's expression darkened immediately. "What is it, Marcus?" he asked, his voice cool. The man adjusted his jacket. "We need your signature. The mineral rights under the Western Ridge just hit 12 figures. The buyers are flying in next week." Faye blinked. 12 figures? Nolan's eyes flicked to her, something unreadable behind them.
"Not now," he said.
"This isn't the time." Marcus hesitated, then nodded and climbed back into the SUV. Faye remained frozen on the porch. "You're not just running a ranch," she said slowly. "You're running an empire." He didn't deny it. "I don't want people to know," he said. "Most start looking at the money. Or worse, start thinking that's all I am." "I'm not most people," she said.
"I know," he said.
"That's what scares me." She didn't answer. Didn't trust herself to. He stepped back inside and closed the door behind him. And Faye stood staring at the stars, heart hammering, wondering what exactly she'd gotten herself into. Faye had meant to avoid Nolan the next day, but that's exactly what she did. She kept to the west paddocks, working with a quiet determination that didn't invite questions. She brushed down horses that didn't belong to her, rest-hacked feed she hadn't been asked to move, and cleaned tack that was already spotless. But her mind wasn't quiet. 12 figures. Buyers flying in. Mineral rights. Words she had no place attaching to a ranch that smelled of hay and dust and sweat. And yet, somewhere behind the fences and fields, there was an empire. One that Nolan had built and hidden with the same care he used to mend broken gates and bottle-feed orphan calves. The sun was low by the time she made it back to the bunkhouse, her shirt clinging to her back and her arms aching. She reached for the water jug on the porch. Faye. She turned, pulse jumping. Nolan stood a few feet away, sleeves rolled down today, collar buttoned, his expression unreadable. His voice wasn't sharp, but it held a quiet weight that made her straighten. "I need your help with something," he said. "Follow me." She hesitated for the briefest second, then nodded and fell into step behind him. He led her past the barn, past the old windmill, toward a part of the property she hadn't seen before. A narrow path opened into a grove of pecan trees, their branches arching overhead like a cathedral. In the middle sat an old wooden bench, weathered gray, and barely held together by rusted bolts. "I used to come here with my mother," he said, stopping beside the bench. "She planted every one of these trees. Said the world moved too fast, and this was the only place it didn't." Faye looked around, the hush of wind through the leaves the only sound. "She passed too?" she asked. He nodded once. "A year before my father. Cancer." She didn't reach for him, didn't offer comfort he hadn't asked for. Instead, she sat on the edge of the bench and waited. He took the spot beside her, elbows resting on his knees. "I didn't tell you about the mineral rights because I didn't want to change what this was," he said. "You're the only person I've met in a long time who looks at this place and doesn't measure it in dollar signs." "I didn't come here looking for money, Nolan," she said. "You know that." "I do," he said, glancing over. "That's why I brought you here." She met his gaze, her chest tightening. "This bench is where I made every decision that mattered," he said. "Whether to keep the ranch, whether to turn down the first offer, whether to stay when I could have walked away." Faye swallowed. "And now, I'm trying to decide if I can let someone in again." The words hung there like smoke, fragile and impossible to ignore. "I don't have anything to offer you," she said slowly. "Not really. I don't have money or connections or," she paused, "a reason to believe someone like you would want someone like me." "I don't want someone like you," he said. "I want you." Her breath caught. He stood, offered her his hand. "Come with me." She took it, letting him pull her to her feet. They walked in silence, the grove behind them. He led her deeper into the property, past the horse paddocks, into a small barn she hadn't entered before. Inside, under the glow of a single bulb, stood a paint mare with deep brown eyes and a gentle tilt to her head.
"She's yours," Nolan said.
Faye blinked. "What?" "I bought her last week," he said. "Watched you ride Colton's gelding and figured you were due for your own." She stepped forward, brushing her fingertips over the mare's neck. The horse nuzzled her shoulder like they'd known each other for years. "You can't just give me a horse," she said, throat tight. "I didn't," he said. "I'm trusting you with her. There's a difference." Faye turned slowly, her eyes shining despite herself. "I don't know what you're doing to me," she said, "but it's working." He stepped closer, his voice low. "I don't want perfect, Faye. I want real. I want this." Before she could respond, the barn door opened and Colton appeared, breathless. "Nolan," he said, urgent.
"You need to see this."
"It's the south fence line." Nolan's expression shifted instantly. "What happened?" "Someone cut through it. Looks like a truck's been through. Fresh tracks. Could be rustlers." Faye's stomach dropped. "Do you have cattle down there?" "Not anymore," Colton said. "Whoever it was drove them out." Nolan turned to her. "Stay with the mare. Lock the doors after we leave." "No," she said. "I'm going with you."
He didn't argue,
just nodded. They rode hard across the fields under a rising moon, dust kicking up behind them as the wind pulled at their clothes. When they reached the south pasture, tire tracks were clear as day, cutting deep into the soil. Several gates hung loose, chains snapped. "Damn it," Nolan muttered, dismounting. Faye crouched beside the tracks. They didn't go far. "The ground's still what they'll get stuck if they try to go through the creek bed." Nolan looked at her, then nodded. "We'll check the ridge trail. They'll need to stay high to keep the truck moving." They followed the trail until the brush got too thick for horses, then proceeded on foot. Nolan moved with the quiet intensity of someone who knew the land like an extension of his own body. It wasn't long before they saw the truck half hidden behind a stand of scrub oak, engines still warm.
"Stay here," he said.
"No," she said again. "You don't get to protect me from everything."
He didn't argue this time.
Together, they approached slowly. But the rustlers were already gone. The cattle, scattered near a makeshift corral, were unharmed. Faye helped Nolan guide them back, adrenaline still humming through her veins as they reached the barn hours later. As the last of the cattle were settled, Faye leaned against the stable wall, exhausted. "You didn't have to come," Nolan said, watching her. "You didn't have to give me a horse," she replied. He stepped closer, the space between them charged. "I meant what I said earlier," he murmured. "I want you here. But not just as someone who works the land. I want you beside me." Faye looked up at him, heart open and unguarded for the first time in years. "Then stop holding back."
He didn't.
He kissed her slow, sure, and full of everything he hadn't said until now. And for the first time since she stepped onto the ranch, Faye didn't feel like a guest. She felt like she belonged. The rain had started again, soft and steady, tapping against the bunkhouse roof, as Faye stood by the window in one of Nolan's old flannel shirts, watching the clouds roll over the hills. Her mare was safe in the barn, the herd was back where it belonged, and the rustlers hadn't come back. Still, something in her chest felt unsettled. Not with fear. With change. A knock came at the door. She pulled it open to find Nolan holding 2 mugs of coffee, steam curling from the tops. "I figured you weren't sleeping either," he said, handing her one. Faye stepped aside to let him in, her fingers warm against the ceramic. "Didn't think you were the coffee in the evening type." "I'm not," he said. "But you are." She raised an eyebrow, but didn't ask how he knew. They stood in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Outside, the rain deepened into a steady rhythm. "I've been thinking," Nolan said, setting his mug down on the table, "about what comes next." Faye leaned against the edge of the counter. "For the ranch? For everything?" He looked at her then, really looked, not with hesitation, not with fear. "I've spent the last 5 years building something I thought I needed to prove. To my father, to the world, maybe even to myself. But I don't want to build it alone anymore." Her heart stuttered, but she kept her voice steady. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want you here. Not just for a season, not just until the next storm passes. I want you to stay with me." Faye set her mug down beside his. "I didn't come here planning to fall in love with a man who owns half the county," she said. "But I did." Nolan stepped closer, the space between them shrinking until it was gone. His hands brushed hers, warm and certain. "I have an offer for you," he said. "And it's not a job." She folded her arms, pretending to consider. "Does it come with benefits?" He didn't laugh. He looked at her like she was the only thing in the room that mattered. "It comes with a permanent home, this land, and me. If you want it." Rain streaked the window behind him, but all she could see was the way his eyes held hers. "I do," she whispered. The next morning, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days, lighting the fields with a golden haze. The air was fresh, the kind that only came after a storm had washed everything clean. Faye stood in the pasture, brushing down the mare as Nolan approached from the barn, holding something small and square in his hand. "I figured if I was going to ask you to stay," he said, "I should do it properly." She turned, brushing hair from her cheek as he stopped in front of her. "It's not a ring," he said.
"Yet."
"But it's a key. To the main house." Faye took it slowly, her fingers curling around the cool metal. "I never wanted to be rescued," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm not rescuing you. I'm asking you to build something with me. Something we can both call ours." She looked down at the key once more, then back up at him. "Then let's get to work." That night, Nolan took her to the top of the ridge he rarely visited, the same one he'd once considered selling for a fortune. But the earth was still there, untouched. Wildflowers bloomed in clusters along the path, and the sky stretched wide and endless above them. "I thought about selling this land once," he said, "for more money than I could ever spend. But now I look at it, and all I see is what it could be." Faye glanced around. "What do you see?" He reached for her hand. "A home." A future. Maybe even a family one day. The words settled into her chest like roots. They sat on the back of his truck until the stars came out, the lights of the ranch far below them, the world quiet and still. "I don't need extravagant," she said, resting her head on his shoulder. "I just need real." "I can give you that," he said. "And whatever else you want." A week later, the ranch threw its biggest celebration in years, not for a holiday, not for a cattle auction, but for a new beginning. The barn was strung with lights Nolan had unearthed from storage, the kind he said his mother used to hang every spring. Long tables were set up with food brought in from town, music played from the back of an old pickup truck, and guests gathered under the stars in boots and denim, raising glasses to change and to love. Faye stood at Nolan's side, wearing a cotton dress she'd found in a forgotten trunk in the bunkhouse, her boots still muddy from the day's work. Nolan held her hand the entire time. Colton gave a toast that made everyone laugh, and someone handed Nolan a microphone. He hesitated just for a second, then turned to Faye. "I didn't know what I needed until she walked onto my land with city boots and more heart than anyone I'd ever met," he said. "I thought I was offering her a job. Turns out, she gave me a life." Faye blinked hard, her throat tight. Later, when the music faded and most of the guests had gone, Nolan pulled her into the center of the empty barn, the lanterns still glowing above them. They danced slowly, no music, just the creak of the old wood floor and the sound of crickets outside. "I've never had this," she said quietly. "Neither have I," he replied, "but I'm not letting it go." She tipped her face up to his, eyes shining. "No need," she said. "I'm right where I want to be." They kissed again, not with urgency, but with the surety of something lasting. Something built not from money or chance, but from choice. The storms had come and gone. And under the stars, on the land that had once been only his, Nolan Maddox held the woman who had changed everything. Faye Nolan wasn't a visitor anymore. She was home. The summer heat had settled over the ranch in full, stretching each day into long, sun-drenched hours. Faye rolled her sleeves up as she stepped into the open barn, the smell of fresh hay thick in the air. She moved with practiced ease now, every motion sure, every task second nature. She wasn't the new hand anymore. She was part of the place. Nolan had spent the morning at the north boundary with the surveyor. Not because he was selling, but because he was expanding. They decided together to build new stables and a guest house near the pecan grove. With the ranch's growing reputation for humane cattle raising and sustainable land practices, other ranchers had started visiting, asking questions, learning from what Nolan had built. And now what they were building together. Faye set down the feed bucket and gave a soft whistle. The mare trotted over, ears flicking forward, her coat gleaming in the filtered light. Nolan had surprised her with a custom saddle last month, hand-tooled leather, dark as coffee, with her initials burned into the side. She hadn't cried when he gave it to her, but her fingers had tightened around the stirrup, and he'd simply pulled her into his arms without a word. She rubbed the mare's neck, lost in thought, when footsteps approached from behind. "I hear you've been out working everyone again," Nolan said, leaning against the stall door. She turned, brushing straw from her jeans. "Someone's got to make sure this place doesn't fall apart. I thought that was my job." "You're too busy being important," she teased. He stepped inside, closing the distance between them. "Actually, I've been thinking about taking a few days off." She tilted her head. "You don't take days off." "I do now," he said. "Because I want to take you somewhere." Her brows lifted. "Where?" "There's a cabin about 2 hours west. It sits at the edge of a lake. No cell service, no fences, no responsibilities for a couple days." "And the ranch?" "We'll survive," he said. "Colton's got it covered. He owes me for pulling him out of that mess with the bull last month." Faye considered it. "You're serious?" He reached into his back pocket and pulled out 2 folded papers. Already made the reservation. We leave Friday morning. She narrowed her eyes. You're getting good at this whole surprise thing. I've had a very good teacher. That Friday, just after sunrise, Nolan loaded the last bag into the back of his truck. Faye climbed into the passenger seat, a thermos of coffee in her lap and her boots propped on the dashboard. As they pulled away from the ranch, she glanced back once the white fence lines glowing in the morning light, the barn doors swinging gently in the breeze, the dogs sprawled in the driveway. She didn't feel like she was leaving anything behind. She was simply bringing it with her. The road wound through hills and low pine forests until, after a couple hours, they turned down a gravel path shaded by oak trees. The cabin stood at the edge of a glass-still lake, its porch wrapped around with rocking chairs, its roof dusted with pine needles. The place smelled like cedar and old wood, and when Nolan opened the door, a breeze blew through the screen and carried the scent of water and sun-warmed stone. Inside, the cabin was simple but beautiful. One room held a wide bed with a handmade quilt, a fireplace, and a kitchenette with copper pans hanging from hooks. The windows opened out toward the lake, and a canoe bobbed gently at the dock. They spent the first day doing absolutely nothing. Faye lay stretched out on a blanket while Nolan dozed beside her, one hand resting on her hip. She read half a novel. He skipped stones. They swam until sundown, then grilled steaks over an open fire, and fell asleep curled together in the middle of the bed, limbs tangled and warm. On the second night, after a long canoe ride and a dinner of fresh-caught trout, Nolan disappeared into the cabin while Faye rinsed her feet by the water. When she stepped back inside, the lights were dimmed and the fire was burning low. A small wooden box sat on the table. She turned to him, heart pausing. I didn't plan to do this here, he said. But plans don't mean much when it comes to you. You walked onto my land and turned my entire life upside down, and for once, I'm glad I didn't see it coming. Faye stared at him, breath caught. He opened the box. Inside was a ring simple, elegant, a pale gold band with a single emerald set in the center. I don't need a ceremony or a crowd or even a date, he said. I just need to know you'll keep building this life with me. Will you marry me, Faye? She didn't cry. She laughed, breathless and bright, and flung her arms around his neck. Well, it's about time, she whispered, voice thick. Yes. He slid the ring onto her finger, and they stood quiet for a moment, firelight flickering across their joined hands. They didn't rush back after the trip. They stayed one more day just because they could, drinking coffee on the porch and watching deer wander through the trees. Back on the ranch, the news spread quickly. Colton nearly dropped a hay bale when he saw the ring. The ranch hands set off fireworks that night, leftover from the 4th of July, and someone strung lights between the barns again. They planned a small wedding under the pecan grove, the trees now taller, the bench still standing in the center. Faye wore a dress she'd sewn herself, nothing fancy, just soft cotton and lace, and Nolan wore his best boots and the cufflinks his father had left him. They said their vows barefoot in the grass, surrounded by everyone who mattered. There were no speeches, no formal dances. Just a long meal under the stars, laughter echoing across the fields, and Nolan's hand wrapped tightly around hers. When the last guests left, and the fire had burned low, Nolan pulled her close, his voice quiet. You know what my favorite part of all this is?
What?
That you never needed saving, he said. You just needed someone to see you. She pressed her forehead to his. You did more than see me. You gave me something I didn't know I could have. What's that? A place to belong. And someone to belong to. They kissed once, slow and deep, and the world around them faded into the hush of crickets and wind. Years passed. They built a guest house. Then another barn. Faye started a program teaching local teens how to work with horses. Nolan bought another stretch of land not because he wanted more, but because she had a vision, and he wanted to give her the space to chase it. They didn't just build a life. They built a legacy. On quiet evenings, they still walked the trails together, hand in hand, watching the sun dip below the hills. And every time they passed the grove, Faye would brush her fingers over the old bench and smile. Because love hadn't rescued her. It had anchored her. And in the heart of a ranch built on sweat and soil and something stronger than steel, that love had taken root and never let go.